And I am a little under the weather. That's why I'm wearing a mask right up to the last minute here. And luckily, United Airlines gave me a sanitation wipe, so I'm going to wipe it down before I leave, too. But, you know, the adrenaline is going to get going. I was a little woozy when I stood up on my feet a little while ago, but I knew that when I got in the room with Teamster women, I was going to be feeling the spirit and feel strong as I need to be. Because there is some deep-rooted sisterhood in this room. So we represent 50,000 flight attendants at 19 different airlines, and some of them flying over us right now, raining down solidarity on this conference right now. And we are also organizing the last unorganized major airline flight attendant union at Delta Airlines. UPS needs to know that when we're coming for them in Atlanta, we're coming for all of them in Atlanta. So I'll tell you what, you can be a supporter on this campaign and build power. This is the largest private sector organizing drive single unit in the country right now. 24,000 flight attendants at Delta Airlines, and under the Railway Labor Act, we have to sign over 50% of physical cards within a year in order to file for an election. The last election was in 2010. We got the exact number of votes that we confirmed in our GOTV, which was about 1,500 to 2,000 less than we had confirmed in prior elections. This was computer balloting, and the company was telling people to vote on company computers. And we lost by a swing of 150 votes out of 20,000 people voting. But since that time, Delta has hired half of the seniority list. And just like Samantha Smith standing up here saying her generation is standing up and saying we want to be counted, so are the flight attendants, the new flight attendants who have been hired at Delta. Now, I am a proud member of AFA, United Airlines, Boston Local Council 27. Just like your general president coming from Boston, that's where I got my union chops. And in Boston, Delta is sending 1,000 new hires at a base that was formerly just 400 last year. So if you're from Boston, you can help. If you are here in Seattle, you can help. Sign up to be a supporter. Help spread the word. Flight attendants have more interaction than with almost any other group of public in this country. And we feel it's our responsibility to spread the word that union is the answer. People are hurting right now, and unions are the answer. This is where we get our power. This is where we get our love. This is where we fight back. That white-collar crime syndicate has to see us coming in the tens of millions. Now, Ashley, I want to thank you so much for the invitation to come here. And I want to thank you for having the opportunity to be in the room full of strong women. My union was formed in 1945 by women who were fighting against all odds just to try to have a job. Everybody stand up. All right, now when you hear something that applies to you, I want you to sit down. If you are married, take a seat. If you are over the age of 32, take a seat. If you have facial hair, and I'm just talking to the men, take a seat. Now, we're about to get a little personal here, but we can handle it. We're strong women. If you are over 115 pounds, take a seat. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. We have the last remaining qualified flight attendants if it were not for our union. In that very first contract, we negotiated a seniority list that meant that management couldn't try to force flight attendants to trade sex for schedules. We had to fight through all kinds of discrimination. And when I started flying as a flight attendant in 1996, we still had to wear 2-inch heels, and we had to go to makeup class and buy makeup while the men got the day off. My first day on the job, a flight attendant pulled me aside because there had been a scuffle in the office over how we were going to work this trip. And these two flight attendants that I was working with had been flying for 35 years. This is in 1996. Woo! So just imagine where they came from and what they lived through to make that job a career that was something I could have. And they both had raspy voices because we had also taken on big tobacco, and our little union was the first one to win against big tobacco and get that out of our workplace. But they were still suffering from that secondhand smoke. And so she pulled me aside, this flight attendant of 35 years. She was gorgeous, but she was crusty too. She said, "Listen, management thinks of us as their wives or their mistresses. And in either case, they hold us in contempt." Now, I was 23, fresh out of company training. And I'm like, whoa. But then she said, "Your only place of worth is with your fellow flying partners. And if we stick together, there is nothing we can't accomplish." And I didn't really understand what that meant. I didn't fully grasp what that meant until I became a union negotiator. But after I started flying, it was about 3 weeks later when I didn't get my first paycheck. And I went into the office and asked somebody to help me. I didn't get my first paycheck, and I'm down to almost no money, and I'm living in one of the most expensive cities in the country. I had an apartment with 7 other women just to get by, and rent was coming due. And they said, "You get your first paycheck at different times for different reasons. We're sure you get it next time." And I'm thinking, all right, they told me in probation I'm supposed to mind my P's and Q's. I guess I'll try to slink out of here and make it work on some top ramen. Luckily, I worked a few first-class shifts, and those were steak and lobster nights. Thank you, guys. But it was rough. And I got to the next payday. I actually jump-seated on a flight to Chicago and back from Boston while I was waiting for the paycheck to hit so I could eat some food. And called up my bank account, it's still zero. Went into the office and said, "Somebody's got to help me. I still didn't get my paycheck." And they said, "Oh, yeah, you get your first paycheck at different times for different reasons." And I'm like, oh, my God, this is what it feels like to be a number. And they don't care. And I'm thinking, like, I have zero in my bank account now. Rent is due tomorrow. What the hell am I going to do? How am I going to survive? And the tears did start to roll. And all of a sudden, I had this tap on the shoulder, and I turned around, and there was someone standing there who looked a lot like me. I'd never seen her before. She was wearing the same uniform. I remember her union pin shining above her United Airlines wings. And she's asking me how to spell my name. And she hands me a check for $800. And she says, "Number 1, you go take care of yourself, and number 2, call our union." And I did call our union, and I had my paycheck the next day. But I learned everything I needed to know about our union in that moment when she was standing in front of me. Because in our unions, we are never alone. And through our unions, we can use the care that we have for one another and get the most out of it. And so I got involved because the local asked me to get involved, and we negotiated a contract that I thought sucked. I worked really hard to get it voted down. I met all these amazing people. We're worth more, damn it. And it just barely passed. And I went to the union meeting afterwards, and people are throwing their union pins down and saying, forget it, forget it. And then the vision came to me. This flight attendant standing there in front of me, writing me that check. And I'm like, we can do better than this. And what I learned is that those women that formed that union in 1945 created this democratic organization that was ours, for us to do what we needed to do with it. And my union, 80% women have struggled. We have struggled every single wet day to not only get to the table and have management take us seriously, but to have the labor movement take us seriously. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories, okay? In 2013, and let me say, September 11th was a pivotal moment for me. I worked United Airlines Flight 175 frequently. This is the flight you can picture slamming into the South Tower because American Flight 11 had slammed in 17 minutes earlier, and the whole world was trained on those buildings. And when we were there grieving for our friends and trying to figure out what our lives were going to mean, management sent somebody in to tell us that the company was hemorrhaging money and we were going to have to pull together to save the company. And thank God Senator Teddy Kennedy walked in the room just then, because that manager would not be alive right now. He said, "You out!" And then we sat around and told stories about our friends and sang patriotic songs and religious songs, and were comforted in probably the only way that a Kennedy can. But what we learned in that moment was that there were people organizing right then, just like Mother Jones said 100 years ago when she was fighting child labor. She said, "The capitalists say there is no need of labor organizing, except that they themselves are always organizing and show their real beliefs." They are always organizing. And they were organizing for those bankruptcies, to strip us of our pensions, to cut our pay so that we were willing to work more hours, more overtime hours. So that today, there is one flight attendant for every two that there was pre-9/11 working the same number of hours. This is what they will do. And what we have to understand is that it is the working class that has to come together in order for us to fight back. The premier tactic of the boss from the beginning of time has been racism and sexism. And Carol Tomei should know that women in leadership is not about checking a box, okay? Women in leadership is about fighting back against the capitalists who have tried to keep all of us apart and keep all of us down and keep us in competition with each other. So, in 2013, the TSA tried to allow knives back on our planes. Great idea, right? And we fought, but they had already changed national security policy, and they had told politicians all over the Hill that this is what they had to do so that they could look for bombs. This is what we were up against. They had already changed national security policy, and we had to stop them from putting those knives back on the planes, because that not only killed 3,000 people, that was the loss of 1 million people's pensions. That was a destruction for the lives of millions of people all over this country. And we were not about to let those knives come back on our planes. So we were up there on Capitol Hill, and I remember, and by the way, we won this fight in 90 days, but I remember being in one of those offices, one of those Senate offices, and making a very impassioned argument that, by the way, was informed by FBI agents and other law enforcement who talked with me tactically about why this was a bad idea. And the Senate staffer reached over and rubbed my arm and said, "I know this is an emotional issue for you." And I was thinking in my head, well, I could stab you right now, except they took my knife when I came in your workplace. But just like when I was on probation, I didn't. I left Capitol Hill and I went back to the Communications of Workers of America building, and I talked to the president at the time, Larry Cohen, and I said, "Larry, we're not just fighting a knife lobby who wants to sell $1 billion in knives with one end that's incredibly deadly and the other end is a USB port. That's not just what we're fighting here. There's a knife lobby. Did you know that? We were fighting $1 billion there. Anyway, I'll follow the money. We're fighting sexism, and how the hell am I going to win against sexism when this country has not yet even been willing to admit that women are equal? And he said, Sarah, he said, your friends died, right? I said, yes, Larry, my friends died. And he said, you go back up on the hill and you tell those assholes exactly this. He said, tell them, listen, motherfuckers, I am not leaving until you fix this. My friends died, and over my dead body are you going to let this continue? So, the next day we won. And and there's a lot of different ways of showing strength. And what I want every woman in this room to know is that do not let someone tell you that because you feel emotion, that is weakness. Emotions are our superpower. It means we're going to fight like hell for the people that we love. We do not let them control us, but we channel it together and we have each other's backs to get the most out of it. And we have to fight like hell because it has been a constant assault. Sean talked about the numbers, a constant assault on our unions. Trying to have people believe that they are something separate from us. We are the unions. And when each of you stands up and takes a leadership position all over this country, whether it is in motion pictures, in healthcare, at UPS, wherever you are, there are other women who are saying, oh, the union is for me too. And that builds power. And we need that power. And so, in 1981, when Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers and said that strike was a dirty word, we had 40 years of labor wilderness in this country. So when the government was shut down in 2019, and we were talking about how unsafe this was, and it was supposedly about a border wall and about the fact that we are divided as a country, that's what they wanted us to believe. There were TSA agents coming to work and air traffic controllers coming to work and other people in the government coming to work without a paycheck to try to take care of the rest of us, but also under the threat that they could be indicted and go to jail. That's how much of an attack on our right to strike there has been. That is why, if I can just take a moment to say, this union does never back away from a strike, always is there for everyone else. And when there is a picket line, you turn around, there is no crossing that. We stand together and we build power together. So, when Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell couldn't work out a deal, we knew we had to take control. And I was talking to Bernie Sanders every single day and talking about the fact that flight attendants were getting ready to strike. And he said, what about the pilots? And I said, Bernie, planes don't take off if pilots don't fly them, but planes also don't leave the gate if flight attendants aren't on them. And so we said we were ready to strike. And when those flights started to stop in LaGuardia after 35 days of getting nowhere, all of a sudden we had a deal when the day before we had none. And that is because, not because a few flights stopped like a weather event today. It was because the GOP was terrified that we were going to get a taste of our power, and they had to shut it down before we could. They have money and they have control. They do not have power. We have power. And when we use our power together, we take control. So for 50 years, they've been trying to tell us we should feel lucky to have a job. And for the next 50 years, starting right now, here in this room with Teamster women, we're going to make sure that they know they should feel lucky to have our work. So you got to know one thing. Stand up. Lead. Women. Come on, stand up. That's right. Women. Tell them all. Join unions and run unions. And I want to know one more thing. Look around to everyone around you. Look them in the eye and tell them, I've got your back. I've got your back.